Today, Riot revealed another champion in the upcoming Shurima-based expansion for Legends of Runeterra, and this time we get Jarvan the Fourth, aka J4. If you only play Legends of Runeterra and you don't have like a League of Legends background, get used to hearing J4. That is the short term for Jarvan the Fourth, and this is a very interesting champion because it does something that I have kind of thought that we were going to see eventually from a gameplay standpoint, though I'll admit I expected it in a little bit different form, and I also expected it on a different champion, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's get into Jarvan here. So Jarvan the Fourth is a 6-cost Demacian champion. He has Barrier. He's a 5/3 on the stat line, and he says when you attack, pay my cost to summon me, challenging the strongest enemy. Now, he will level up to his level 2 form when allies have survived 4 or more strikes from enemy blockers. This is a very interesting mechanic because it's essentially the burst version of a champion. This will allow you to play Jarvan from hand and still have him attacking, but from an open attack position. So in other words, the start of your turn, you don't play any cards, you go straight to the attack step, you can summon Jarvan and he will be attacking. Now he will be attacking but also challenging an enemy, so it's a bit interesting because it kind of reins in his power level. You don't have to worry about, you know, surprise 5 damage to the Nexus. It's not something like the Mist Wraith burst spell, for example, in that regard, and it does allow you to kind of keep that being unique to the Mist Wraiths, so I think that's nice in that regard. Now the level 2 version of Jarvan, when you do level him up, he gets the classic +1/+1 to his stat line, so he remains a 6 cost, keeps his barrier, goes to his 6/4. You can still do the surprise attack with Jarvan. However, he now gains round start, create a fleeting Cataclysm in hand. Cataclysm is his champion spell as well, and we'll look at that in a moment. And then he says, when I challenge an enemy, give me barrier this round. So if you level him up, he not only has his starting barrier, but he keeps it. And that's really important in my opinion, because his health is relatively low for such an expensive champion. He has, you know, at his base level, Nocturne like stats, but costs 2 more. Now, again, pretty powerful effect here, so I understand why they didn't want to make him too cheap, but you definitely want the leveled version of Jarvan if your goal is to continue running down your enemy units. Now, another interesting note here is that he plays, in my mind, similar to Fiora, but he's going to be more expensive and without the same payoff. So obviously he's not an alternative win condition like Fiora, but this is still a 3 health champion that you kind of need to keep alive. And then even when he goes to 4 health, you need to protect him if you want to keep getting this long-term benefit. So he's a bit interesting in that regard. His champion spell, as I mentioned before, is Cataclysm. This is a 3-cost slow spell, and it says an ally starts a free attack challenging an enemy. So this is interesting because it's not fully rally, but it can be a 4-man's rally if you are running scouts, because if you are, for example, on a turn where you did not start with the attack token, and then you play Cataclysm, but you do so on one of your scouts, that scout is then attacking, which will then trigger the scout ability, allowing you to then gain the attack token in full. So there's some interesting things that you can do in that regard. And before we move on to the last card that was revealed as far as like the Jarvan set goes, there are more, by the way, but this is just the first graphic. I want to talk about this idea of like a burst champion. So I felt that burst champions were likely going to be a thing. I didn't expect it to be done this way, and I don't hate it. I actually think this is very in line with Jarvan. If you're not familiar with him from League of Legends, he has this ability that is oftentimes referred to as flag and drag. So you might hear that as well if you're somebody who just plays Runeterra, doesn't really pay attention to League. Flag and drag is a Jarvan ability, and essentially he drops a flag on the battlefield, and then if you attack with your polearm in that direction, he damages everything along the line, but he also moves to that location. So you typically use it to gain a bunch of distance in the game to surprise the enemy and kind of jump on them and try to get your damage in. So this idea of Jarvan surprising and challenging opposing units, I think is very much in line with his champion design from League of Legends. So I like that. I just expected burst champions to be one, defensive. I expected you to only be able to play them as blockers, again, to rein in that potential issue of, you know, too high of a power level when you are going for the open attack against, you know, an open nexus. And I honestly expected it to be on champions like Rengar or Evelynn or maybe Kha'Zix. And the reason I expected it to be those is because they are assassins. They are traditionally champions in League of Legends that thrive on killing other champions in that game or other units. And Evelynn and Rengar, for example, are very stealth based. And so they very much catch you off guard out in the open. They just appear and you're having a bad time. And so for a long time, I figured that when they were eventually added to the game, they would have some kind of burst-like ability where when you are being attacked, they pop out and then kind of assassinate a unit. So interesting that instead, when this first appears, it's on the attack, but I do like the challenging design. And I do like that this exists because we still might get what I'm talking about. We still might get that Rengar or that Evelynn or, you know, some stealth-based assassin champion, maybe a Pyke or something will do that as well. It could be a lot of fun. Now, the last card that's here, and again, for those who are unfamiliar with the terminology, this is J3. So this is Jarvan's dad. The card itself is King Jarvan III. This is a 7-cost 3/6 unit with tough. Now he says, when I'm summoned, draw Jarvan IV. So in many ways, this is like the Demacian version of a boat. So in the Bilgewater expansion, we had a bunch of boats that found their captains. You know, Dreadway finds Gangplank, and Tusk Raider finds Sejuani, and so on and so forth. This is interesting because instead of a boat, it's literally your father. He literally births Jarvan when he comes into play. Now he also says if he's already in play, so if Jarvan IV is already in play, instead give allies Challenger and Scout this round. So this creates the potential for some really interesting turns if you are doing both of these units on curve and you are attacking on odds, or you have spell mana banked up and maybe you're not attacking on odds, but you can trigger something like Cataclysm on that round 7. So Jarvan costs 6, King Jarvan costs 7. If you play Jarvan on 6 and then you come into playing Jarvan on 7, this is a very, very big swing turn because you will have Jarvan already in play. He likely ate a unit the round before. And then you've got King Jarvan giving all allies, so like your entire squad, gets Challenger and Scout. And that becomes a lot of attacks. Now, his stat line doesn't seem super impressive for a 7-drop. He's only a 3/6. But the tough is nice because it gives him a lot of survivability with that 6 health. And if the entire point of him is to play him after Jarvan has already found a home on the board, him having Challenger and Scout with the 3/6 stat line with tough likely means he's going to trade into 2 units and survive, or at least pull potential blockers twice and survive. So again, this is mostly about setting his cost to be an appropriate level for the high end of his swing turn. But if you don't have Jarvan on the board, this is not a very impressive unit, even with the elite tag. So the last thing I want to mention before we go check out the other cards is both Jarvan and his father, so J3 and J4, do have the elite tag, so a little bit more support for elites as well. But that's it for Jarvan and his father. There were some additional cards that were revealed though, so I'm going to go ahead and change the graphic over here. And these are 6 more cards. Well, it's really 5 because one of them is a token created by the others, but we'll check them out. So we're going to start with Honored Lord. This is a 2-cost elite that is a 3/2 unit. Now he does not inherently have any keywords, but he says the first time I challenge an enemy, give me barrier this round. So this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, this is a Demacian unit that has Renekton like text. So when Renekton was revealed, we talked about how he gets bonuses when he challenges a unit, but he does not have challenger. Honored Lord is the same. This gets barrier when he challenges a unit, but he does not have challenger. So you'll have to either grant him challenger, or you can run into units with vulnerable, etc., etc. Now, I'll throw this back up again here real quick. Obviously, J3 here can grant allies challenger, and I think that this is, you know, part of that design, but Honored Lord here is interesting. The other thing to note is this says the first time I challenge an enemy, not the first time I challenge an enemy in a round. So I imagine this barrier trigger only happens the one time. And then if you challenge other units with him further, he will not get the barrier. So interesting unit. I think that it could be a value generator in expeditions. I think that at least right now, based on the cards that we have seen, it might be a little bit too much of an investment to get the payoff for him, because this is a 2-drop and it's a 2-drop that requires a fair amount of build around. It's hard to imagine this being amazing. Now it could be, again, we haven't seen the full set, but it just right now feels like the amount of work to get the payoff is too high. Now, if I'm wrong, and it ends up being very easy to either grant him challenger or grant other things vulnerable, and those are very playable cards, this becomes on par with Bright Steel Protector. It doesn't protect other units, but it does still give you a 3/2 with a barrier for the 2 mana investment, and then you also potentially eat something. So it becomes a very playable, very powerful unit if you can consistently get the payoff. Next up, we have Golden Aegis. Now this is a card that I'm also very interested in. This is a 4-cost slow spell, and it says give an ally barrier this round, rally. So traditionally, barrier effects have all been burst speed. So this is a slow barrier spell, but the payoff is that you also get rally. This is kind of nutty when you think about it just from a straight value perspective, because Relentless Pursuit costs 3 to just rally. So for the low cost of 1 mana, you get a free barrier out of it. That feels strong. Now, obviously, Relentless Pursuit has the benefit of you can play it with only spell mana, right? You can bank 3 and always have that ready to go. This card eats into your mana if you still have the full banked 3. But this is kind of a steal in terms of value, and in the kind of decks that you would want to run this. So again, I think about something like Shen Fiora. This card feels like it could find a home there. Maybe it's a mix. Maybe it's like 1 Relentless and 1 Golden Aegis when that deck traditionally runs 2 Relentless Pursuit. Who knows? But for a 1 mana upgrade, you get a barrier out of it, and I find that to be very interesting. Next up, we have Battlefield Prowess. This is the cousin to Radiant Strike. This is a 1-cost spell, but the difference is that this is slow instead of burst speed, but this grants the ally +1/+1 as opposed to just giving it +1/+1 this round. Pretty straightforward. I don't at the moment see this finding a lot of play unless there are some early game units that you really want to protect, or there are other interactions that this card can trigger that I'm just not thinking of at the moment. And the big reason that I say this is simply that, you know, Radiant Strike has fallen out of favor, and Sharp Sight gives you a ton of utility, and so even though it's temporary, it's very cost effective. And so something like this just feels slow, and I don't mean that just because it's a slow spell. It just is very little payoff for the investment. Next up, we have Penitent Squire. This is a 1-cost 2/2. When I'm summoned, if you behold an elite, create a Tattered Banner in hand. Now, Tattered Banner is the other card here in the bottom middle, and this is a token card. You can tell because it doesn't have the gem on it, so this is only created by the Squire. But Tattered Banner is a 1-cost burst spell that says the next time you summon an ally this round, grant it Challenger. So this is, again, kind of that Jarvan theme, the old flag and drag. So you plop the banner down and then you charge into it, or in this case, you challenge into an opposing unit. So I like the design from that standpoint. Penitent Squire could find a home, could be playable if elites end up becoming an archetype. The biggest issue that Squire has is that it competes with Cytheria, and it competes with the tracking bird. And I don't know that it's good enough to beat the bird or not. It could be, because you gain flexibility with the banner to, instead of it just being the tracker that has Challenger, you can give something far more beneficial Challenger with this burst spell, and you do get the extra stat point out of it, so you get a 2/2 instead of a 2/1. I think that you also could potentially replace Cytheria with this, because this is still a 1-cost 2/2. It's not an elite itself, but it does still need you to run a certain number of elites so that you get that trigger. But this, in an elite deck, this is playable. I'll say that. This is definitely playable. A one cost 2/2 is very playable. A 1-cost burst spell that you give Challenger to a unit, I mean, that seems pretty good. So this is playable. It just requires the kind of build around elite function. So speaking of elites, the last card that was revealed today is Gallant Rider. This is a 4-cost 4/4 elite. The first time I challenge an enemy, transform me into Vanguard Cavalry. So again, this is a unit that gets a benefit when it challenges, but it does not have challenge itself. So you will have to grant it that somehow. Again, potentially with Tattered Banner, for example, right? This Tattered Banner is an activator for cards like Honored Lord, for cards like Gallant Rider. Now, I will say that Gallant Rider is a little bit easier to pull off because Honored Lord being, again, a 2-drop, you're not going to play Squire on 1 and then Lord on 2 and be able to challenge with it, because you won't have the mana for the banner. So you'd have to have some other activator to get him on curve on 2. Now, playing him after that is entirely fine, but he's just a little bit more clunky. Gallant Rider, on the other hand, you absolutely could have the banner ready to go. In fact, the Penitent Squire and the Gallant Rider work very well together because he's an elite, so that could be the behold trigger for your Squire. And then as long as you've banked your 1 spell mana, he comes down on 4 after you've played the banner. He challenges something, and then in doing so, he transforms into the Vanguard Cavalry. Now, Cavalry is not shown on this image, but it is a card that already exists. It is the 5-cost 5/5 elite that has Tough. So basically, the payoff, if you will, for triggering Rider is that you get a cheaper version of Vanguard Cavalry, and it's already challenging a unit, so you're likely giving yourself that beneficial trade as well. So the payoff for the Rider is you're hopefully spending, 4 mana, or if you're doing this with the Tattered Banner, it's 5 total mana, but it's a turn sooner because you can eat into your spell mana to get that 5/5 Tough unit, and you're also already challenging something, so you're likely getting a value trade. So that's it. That's it for the reveals. I will say, out of the stuff revealed today, the card that excites me the most is Golden Aegis, because it's got a lot of direct application right now. The rest of the ones revealed today, in my opinion, they require me to see more from the set. I don't know if we get enough elite support to suddenly make that a deck again. It hasn't been for a while. And Jarvan is interesting. The power from Jarvan, I'll put that graphic back up again here real quick. The real power from Jarvan is obviously the fact that this is a burst speed champion, and as such, you can create some really interesting combat steps. And just by running Jarvan could even end up being in like Demacian decks as a one of, just to force your opponent to play around nightmare open attack scenarios. So the threat of Jarvan actually might be worth more than Jarvan himself. But I do think that he's an interesting champion. I like the design. I think that it fits Jarvan very well as far as his league counterpart. I just don't know right now, for me personally, that he excites me enough to be like, I want to play him day one. I know that Renekton is like the new shiny toy because he's in an entire new region, but I'm just not seeing the same level of excitement for me personally for Jarvan as I did Renekton. But I do love the design, and I think that as I said before, even as a one of, I think that he could provide value to some Demacian decks. So that's it for today's video. Sorry for the ranting. I've been a little bit under the weather lately, and every time I start to feel better, it starts coming back. I'm like perpetually stuck with this head cold. I don't know if you can hear it as I'm talking, but anyway, I appreciate you if you made it this far. Thanks for watching the video. Share your thoughts. I want to know what you're excited about so far from the expansion. And on that note, I'll see you in the next reveal video.